Now let's take a look at typical intervals. So the idea behind typical intervals is basically to see sort of what we might expect to happen if we picked an individual at random. What's sort of the common responses? So the idea is to see the common or expected responses. So recall we've seen this before. So given the 5-number summary, the typical interval was Q1 to Q3, or in terms of the box plot, that's just the box. For the mean and standard deviation, we put our mean in the middle. We go up by 1 standard deviation to the right. We go down by 1 standard deviation to the left. So we have the mean minus the standard deviation and the mean plus the standard deviation. And we consider this stretch from the mean minus the standard deviation to the mean plus the standard deviation to be our typical interval. So again, remember the standard deviation essentially was a measure of our typical distance from the mean. So if we take our mean and we go that typical distance to each side, then that should cover our sort of typical responses. So our typical interval is the mean minus the standard deviation to the mean plus the standard deviation. So we are going to go ahead and just do one example of this. I apologize. Apparently my computer doesn't recognize mean and decided it should be mega. The mean lifetime. There we go. So our key pieces of information here, we have our mean lifetime. Oops. Okay. We have our mean lifetime of 17 years. And we have a standard deviation of 1.5 years. So this means that our X bar is 17 and our S, our standard deviation, is 1.5. Your textbook often uses SD for standard deviation. If we want our typical interval, we have our mean in the middle. We are going to add on 1 copy of the standard deviation. So we add 1.5. We subtract 1.5. If we do 17 plus 1.5, that puts us at 18.5. 17 minus 1.5 puts us at 15.5. Okay, so we have our dropping down to 15.5, going up to 18.5. From 15.5 to 18.5 is therefore our typical interval. So essentially what we have is typical refrigerators. Last between 15.5 and 18.5 years. All right, so that's just a rough intro to the typical interval.